Chairman, in view of that
Your point of order?
Not exactly, Mr. Chairman, but in view of Mr. Welch's request that the information be given once we know of anyone who might be performing any work for the Communist Party, I think we should tell him that he has in his law firm a young man named Fisher, whom he recommended incidentally to do the work in this committee, who has been for a number of years a member of an organization which was named, years and years ago, as the legal bulwark of the Communist Party, an organization which always springs to the defense of anyone who dares to expose communists. I certainly assume that Mr. Welch did not know of this young man at the time he recommended him as the assistant counsel for this committee, but he has such terror and such a great desire to know where anyone is located who may be serving the communist cause, Mr. Welch, that I thought we should just call to your attention the fact that you're Mr. Fisher, who is still in your law firm today, whom you asked to have down here looking over the secret and classified material, is a member of an organization not named by me, but named by various committees, named by the Attorney General, as I recall. He belonged to it long after it had been exposed as the legal arm of the Communist Party. Therefore, we will give you the information about the young man in your own organization. Now, I'm not asking you at this time to explain why you tried to foist him on this committee. That you did, the committee knows. Whether you knew that he was a member of that communist organization or not, I don't know. I assume you did not, Mr. Welch, because I get the impression that while you are quite an actor, you play for a laugh, I don't think you have any conception of the danger of the Communist Party. Mr. Chairman, the news story on that.
Under these circumstances, I must myself have something approaching a personal privilege. Senator McCarthy, I did not know, Senator, sometimes you say, may I have your attention?
I'm listening. Mr. Senator, I didn't know.
May I have your attention?
One ear and talk
Now, this time, sir,
okay.
I want you to listen with both.
Good.
Senator McCarthy, I think until this moment...
Just let me ask, Jim, when you get the news story, the effect that this man belongs to this communist-run organization...
I will tell you that he belonged to it. Senator, you won't need anything in the record when I finish telling you this. Until this moment, Senator, I think I never really gauged your cruelty or your recklessness. Fred Fisher is a young man who went to the Harvard Law School and came into my firm and is starting what looks to be a brilliant career with us. When I decided to work for this committee, I asked Jim St. Clair, who sits on my right, to be my first assistant. I said to Jim, pick somebody in the firm to work under you that you would like. He chose Fred Fisher, and they came down on an afternoon plane. I then said to these two young men, boys, I don't know anything about you except I've always liked you. But if there's anything funny in the life of either one of you that would hurt anybody in this case, you speak up quick. And Fred Fisher said, Mr. Welch, when I was in the law school, and for a period of months after, I belonged to the Lawyers Guild, as you have suggested, Senator. And I said, Fred, I just don't think I'm going to ask you to work on the case. If I do, one of these days that will come out and go over national television, and it will just hurt like the dickens. So, Senator, I asked him to go back to Boston. Little did I dream you could be so reckless and so cruel as to do an injury to that lad. It is true he is still with Hale and Dorr. It is true that he will continue to be with Hale and Dorr. It is, I regret to say, equally true that I fear he shall always bear a scar needlessly inflicted by you.
Now, I just give this man's record, and I want to say, Mr. Welch, that it has been labeled long before he became a member, as early as 1944.
Senator, may we not drop this? We know he belongs to the Lawyers Guild. Let us not assassinate this lad further, Senator. You've done enough. Have you no sense of decency, sir? At long last, have you left no sense of decency?
I know this hurts you, Mr. Welch.
Mr. McCarthy, I will not discuss this further with you. You have sat within 6 feet of me and could have asked me about Fred Fisher. You have seen fit to bring it out, and if there is a God in heaven, it will do neither you nor your cause any good. I will not discuss it further. I will not ask Mr. Cohen any more witnesses. You, Mr. Chairman, may, if you will, call the next witness.
Welcome once again to the Radical Imagination. I'm your host, Jim Vrettos. I used to teach at John Jay College. I'm a sociologist, and I'm so glad to welcome you to another one of our provocative attempts to reach out and explore alternative narratives. And this week, we're interested in looking at resisting and refusing fascism. And as you've noticed, we had an extensive clip from the McCarthy Army hearings where refusing fascism took a form in the 50s that I think was very, very provocative and very important. Today, I would like to introduce to you J.W. Walker, who is on the steering committee of Refuse Fascism here in New York City, and he's involved in a very exciting attempt to raise consciousness, to get a whole bunch of people out there in the street and, as we say, try to transform this society. So, Jay, welcome. It's great to have you on the show.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
And now you have this big event on November 4th. Tell us a little about it. Tell us a little about the organization, the strategy, your attempts to build this movement.
Absolutely. Well, refusefascism.org was begun in the aftermath of the 2016 election. It was initiated by a wide variety of people from a lot of different backgrounds. And
different organizations?
Different organizations, just individuals. Cornel West was one of the initiators.
Right.
Chief Iron Eyes of the Standing Rock Reservation was one of the initiators. Bob Avakian of the Revolutionary Communist Party was an initiator. Carl Dix.
Which you're not a member of.
Which I'm not a member of.
Okay.
Carl Dix, who's been such a fighter for so many amazing causes, going back to the 60s, and many other people from a wide variety of backgrounds. They did it basically an analysis of what we were facing in the aftermath of Trump's quote-unquote victory.
Right.
And what we saw, and what was kind of presaged in a lot of the writing about Donald Trump, leading up to the election, during the primary period, during the election period, was that there was a qualitative difference, a qualitative change in what the Donald Trump presidency meant for the United States. And I'm so glad that you opened with the McCarthy Army hearings clip. because that was another moment in our country's history when we were drifting into fascism, just through the power of one charismatic demagogue.
It's a great way of putting it. Yeah, and we've drifted even further, I think.
Exactly.
today.
And we beat it back then, right? We beat
Absolutely.
it back with that "Have you no shame, sir?" We beat it
And
back.
decency. And that's so important.
Yes, and now we're entering into a particularly troubling time because it's not just a senator who's taking control of a series of congressional hearings. We're actually talking about someone who is the president of the United States of America. And what we see day by day, week by week in this administration is it's not even a soft drift into fascism. It's from the first day. It's become it's been clear just day in and day out that is what he is trying to institute. And so Refuse Fascism was founded back in last December, and we've been working
Sort of an ad hoc group of people getting together and, hey, let's sit down here. This is serious stuff, and how should we respond?
And how should we respond? And how can we reach out to people to bring them into this group? And we're not, outside of resisting fascism, outside of refusing fascism. RefuseFascism.org is not single issue based because you can't be when confronting this administration. And so the goal is to bring in all of these different organizations, all of these movements.
Make the links.
Make the links.
And the faith-based communities.
And
I think you have to.
Absolutely.
That's something I've noticed you're adding in a sense.
Absolutely. Well, and really from the beginning of that very first meeting that was broadcast nationally but was based here at Cooper Union, we had members of the faith community speaking from the very beginnings of Refuse Fascism. And the faith community is incredibly important. One of our touchstones, if you will, is the very famous poem by Niemöller, by Father Niemöller, "First They Came," and the idea that it is vitally important that faith leaders who have their flocks and have their extraordinary outreach throughout their communities and even on a wider basis have to be a part of this movement that affects not just the future of the United States, but because of the power that the United States has, the future of the planet and of humanity.
Interesting. Okay, so this is at least a year in the making, and you've decided to take or encourage an action, which I've signed on to as well.
Wonderful.
On November 4th.
Yes.
And what is that going to entail? What are you asking people to do?
Our goal is to get people out into the streets. November 4th, Refuse Fascism is organizing rallies, marches throughout the country, and at least 20 different cities, some very large cities like LA, like the San Francisco Bay Area, Chicago, New York City, but also smaller communities, medium-sized cities, Austin, Texas, Boston, Philadelphia, some cities in North Carolina, Georgia, Atlanta. And the idea behind it is to get people out into the streets on November 4th, and to keep people coming out, pushing this one message that this nightmare must end. The Trump-Pence regime must go. We must.
So there'll
get
be
them out.
rallies, debates, and discussions, and
rallies, marches, debates. We have multiple chapters in all of these different cities. We do have national organizing committees, but we do have every individual chapter is organizing themselves, and so different chapters are going to do different things. But yes, rallies, discussions, absolutely.
So this
public
is a
protests,
continuous,
theatrical protests, every
literally
day.
ongoing until
they're out. They're out, and the goal is.
So this is quite a commitment.
It is. It's a huge commitment, but it's the sort of commitment that's necessary when we look at what we're facing. The ideas on that first November 4th will have probably across the country, a few tens of thousands of people out in the streets between those 20 cities. And the goal is to grow it every day, bringing in more people, to grow from the tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands to millions of people. The issue that we're facing is that when you look at the elites, at the power structure of this country, both the political elites and the economic elites, when you read journalists who interview people on background, and what you hear them saying is that I keep reading these background references to interviews with former Republican members of Congress who are still keyed in to current members of Congress, who are still speaking speaking with current members of Congress. And what you keep hearing is that these former congressmen are saying it, the current ones are saying that they know how insane this is. They know what a threat this Trump-Pence regime is to the country, but only off the record. Only off the record.
They're willing to do, right.
And what you have to think about with politicians especially, politicians are essentially, they're very fearful people. They're fearful of losing their funding, and they're fearful of losing the citizens' votes. That's
next election.
their entire. That's how they're oriented
by and large,
entirely, by and large, for the most part.
And to get elected and reelected, whatever it takes. And
whatever it takes.
To do.
And the only way that we're going to be able to get the sitting politicians to actually come out to admit that this is a move toward fascism, that this is a fascist regime, is if they have the cover of their citizenry standing up against it and standing up and calling it out for what it is. Once there are enough people in all of these communities and there is a clamor, then the people will have created the space that the politicians are
maybe moral backbones.
Yeah.
If you grow those things.
Exactly. They'll be buttressed, let's say.
But so in the last couple of days, as you know, Corker and Flake, two senators, have come out. Is this sort of what you? I mean, they didn't come out and say he's outright fascist, but they're pretty damning.
They're
words.
at least standing
This is what
up.
you'd like people to begin to do at every level, wherever they're at in our society.
Exactly. However, with Corker and Flake and with John McCain as well, both Corker and Flake announced that they they're not going to campaign for office beyond their current term.
Although there's some talk about Flake maybe even running for president.
Well, I think both of them are thinking in those terms. Both of them, they by not running for their next Senate term, they've opened a wide space up in front of them to be perceived as an elder statesman, as someone who's brave. But we have to remember that
so there's certain reasons why they're doing this, and the motivation might be, okay, well, let me take a chance here. Maybe the winds will shift, and guess what? I'll be.
Exactly. But the thing is that we have to remember that Corker and Flake paved the road.
Yeah.
They paved the road for the rise of a Trump. With the dog whispering on racial politics, we know what the Republican Party has been doing for the last 40 years to divide citizens, to turn different cohorts of poor people against one another, so that they don't see the kind of political power that the poor and the working class could have if they'd forget about the racial and ethnic and sexual differences among people and join together to form like one movement. That's how the Republican Party was prepared for the rise of Trump. It was everything was done with dog whispering. Everything was silent, under the radar. But the folks that needed to hear it, the white supremacist organizations that needed to hear it, heard it, took what they wanted from it, and were able to become a member of the Republican Party. What we've seen with Trump is that rather than dog whispering, he's been yelling at the top of his lungs. Right. All of that stuff that the Republican Party has been quietly saying sotto voce for decades. Trump simply ripped away the scrim and was rewarded for it.
Totally agreed, but still, saying all that, it's nice to hear. Mm-hmm. These two voices in the wilderness.
It is.
And also,
it is helpful.
We could go on too with the Democrats and their complicity and
absolutely.
their hypocrisy too. On
absolutely.
All this. But that's But so okay, November 4th. So what's happening in New York, for example? How could people
So yeah, in New York, it's
know about this and get in touch and
in New
get
York,
out
we're
there?
doing a huge outreach. We last weekend we spent doing a massive postering and poem carding outreach. There's going to be advertisements coming out. In New York, we're having a massive rally in just south of Times Square on Broadway between 40th and 42nd Street, followed by a march down to Washington Square Park. We will, it's all permitted. And this is an important thing to note regarding Refuse Fascism, because there's been a lot of talk out in the on the internet claiming that we're calling for violent revolution and all sorts of nonsense, that the folks who follow Trump, the quote unquote alt-right, who I just prefer to call white supremacists, the white nationalists, whatever you want to call them, the
neo-Nazis,
the rude boys, the neo-Nazis, the neo-fascists, whatever you want to call them, have been saying that we're violent extremists, and nothing can be further from the truth. Refuse Fascism is completely oriented around nonviolence. We are a completely nonviolent movement. The notion of us doing anything violent is simply a non-starter.
Are you prepared for violence? You think the police are up to their game in terms of at least preventing that from happening? But certainly better than
than Charlottesville.
One would expect.
Certainly better than the police were prepared to deal with it in Charlottesville.
Right.
I don't have any illusions about police forces generally in the United States of America. I'm sure that you are aware of the 2006 FBI report about white supremacists infiltrating police forces and civil defense forces, and having been doing so for quite a few years, and the fact that nothing has ever been done to address that on a local, statewide, or federal level since that 2006 report was released. So I have no illusions. However, I do believe that in New York, and I will give credit to Mayor de Blasio for this. I think that, as the resistance in New York City has grown, and I'm not just talking about Refuse Fascism, I personally belong to several resistance groups that do direct action, public protests and what have you.
Get back to that if you want, or tell us a little about this.
Sure. I have a history of activism. I was out of it for a number of years, for about 10 years. Last year, when the Pulse nightclub shooting happened in June, I was compelled to come to the first meeting of a group at the LGBT Center that came to be known as Gays Against Guns. So I was a founding member of Gays Against Guns and serve on the steering committee with them, and then and have worked nonstop for the past year on anti-gun violence issues. After the election, in addition to joining Refuse Fascism at its beginnings, I also joined another group that was founded shortly after the election called Rise and Resist, which is a New York-based activist group with sort of has, and both that and Gays Against Guns both sort of have a lot of former ACT UP members involved, and sort of are from that sort of genesis of direct action, active style, kind of theatrical, a lot of gay energy, that sort of thing. So
chaining oneself to St. Pat's.
Exactly, the giant condom over Jesse Helms's house.
Little performance art.
Performative. Exactly.
Back in the '60s, we need that.
You need to have all of
some
that.
Of that. Actually.
And so the upshot of that is that I've experienced the police as a member of all of these different groups doing our independent actions, and I've certainly seen instances where the police were heavy-handed, were really treated some activists very poorly. Obviously, there are racial dynamics at play in how the police respond to different activists at different times. There are racist, there are ageist situations where the older and whiter you are as an activist, the less likely you are to be roughed up by a police, and the younger and browner you are, the more likely you are.
But you're not out there. This is not the purpose to provoke the
No,
police. We're not
no.
obviously.
Absolutely
okay.
not.
And,
Absolutely
and
not.
this march takes place what, noon? Or
We're going to be gathering,
Gathering.
and the rally will be from 2 p.m. on the November 4th to 4 p.m. and then we'll be marching south starting at around 4 p.m. on that Saturday, November 4th.
And you feel the energy this is the right time for this. Just as you were talking about your own involvement that was somewhat dormant for a while, and then finally enough. Enough is enough, and people from all kinds of backgrounds are realizing that, whether it's Jews or gays or blacks or what, athletes. So you're having this coming together
Exactly.
of a lot of loose knit groups and alliances and individuals and so on. And I guess the hope is, well, is there a hope to have some sort of umbrella organization, or at this point just to mobilize people? That's the issue. Get people out there and then sort of in a participatory democratic way work from there. Is that sort of part of the strategy?
Definitely part of it. I think that we've seen since the election last November, the rise of the rise of the resistance, right? The concept of the resistance in the United States, just across the board, and that's been very helpful for people to sort of break down those barriers.
That they're not alone, right?
That we're all a part of something bigger. What I think that Refuse Fascism offers is an actual plan, plan of action to get these people out of office, in terms of what it will take to actually have a qualitative change in the way that the country is dealing with this rise. Because
everybody just turn up their TV because they want to really. Okay, so what is this plan here?
It's essentially what I've been saying, and that is that right now there's a multi-million-dollar plan right now to launch a sort of impeachment situation. There's a fellow, I can't bring his name to mind right now. Mayor, I can't recall what his name is.
You're not talking about. That's another thing I've become involved with this new book, The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump, 27 Psychiatrists.
Yes, I have seen that.
And actually, James Gilligan's been on the show a number of times, and Bandy Lee, the editor, has also done a couple of shows, and they're planning on coming back on. That's another, what they see themselves as is consultants and are going to Congress to give some
laying some groundwork, giving some evidence,
for the future,
giving some
right?
evidence.
That
exactly
for possible impeachment at some later point.
Exactly. And so what I'm saying is that the impeachment thing is that's one thing.
Okay, but that's not what you're talking about.
But that's not what that's not what Refuse Fascism is talking about. Because if we impeach Donald Trump, if we use the emoluments clause and indict Donald Trump, the 25th Amendment, all of that gets Donald Trump out. That doesn't get all of his appointees out. That does not get Mike Pence, who is a Christo-fascist of the highest order, or the lowest order, depending on how you want to phrase it. It doesn't get any of them out, and it continues this forward march, because the roots of this fascist this fascist seizing of government, they're not Donald Trump. Donald Trump is in many ways a vehicle for these forces to take control of our government. He was a convenient character that
and
they could use.
He's been propped up himself.
Exactly,
also.
absolutely across the board. And so while there is all that sort of orientation around impeachment, what have you, and there, like I said, one fellow is pledging $10 million to do this whole public campaign.
Right.
That's not enough. What Refuse Fascism, and the reason that we have phrased our call very carefully, is that it's the Trump-Pence regime must go. It's not Donald Trump must be impeached. It's the Trump-Pence regime must go.
It's a key word, regime.
And it's got to be it's essentially an all or nothing, because if any of those facets left are remaining in power, then they will continue to grow. They will continue to spread.
And regime, of course, what you're talking about is it goes beyond those two as well.
Oh yeah, no, yeah, it's the entire regime. It's all of the appointees. It's the Supreme Court. It's the Supreme Court justice that he's put to
and
office.
The cultural and faith leaders who are supporting it and so on. So we're talking about
Yeah.
spiritual transformation, political, economic, intellectual, and so on. Getting at some of the structural roots, psychological roots, etc., moral roots of the depravity that America's fallen into.
That we've fallen into, and it's a frightening place to be.
So you start
So the whole idea is people. Essentially our elites, our power structure, they have abrogated their responsibility. Like we were just saying,
more democracy.
Yes, exactly.
Trust in the people.
Trust in the people to get things done. That it has to be from the ground up. It has to be the people demanding that this is not what we signed up for in when we were born and told we were Americans and what being an American means. Right. This is not what being an American is supposed to mean. Now we can argue about all the mistakes that America has made over its 4 centuries of existence, pre-Constitution and post-Constitution.
But
and I'm happy to have those conversations. Sure. But there are always these ideals in place.
Very important.
Whether we lived up to them or not.
Make it positive too, because
yes.
This is a positive experiment,
yes.
or at least part of it is. Mm-hmm. There are some roots there that we need to cultivate, and that seems to be what you're trying to
absolutely
do, and trust in the people.
Yes.
Doing this.
Yes, we've had decades of making parts of our population sort of ripe for this fascist takeover. We've had this coarsening of political discourse that's been going on, since at least since the 60s, since that sort of major linchpin moment in the 60s where there were certain forces of orthodoxy
the John Birch
Society,
Klan and so on.
Exactly, but also when you look at how that spreads out through the culture, and you look at the way that education has changed. You look at the defunding of public education. You look
the
at
business model,
the rise of the charter school. You look at the way that everything has become about teaching to standardized tests, which means it's a lot of English and a lot of math, and now we're seeing the STEM curricula being put forth as though this is going to be the future of education, but we've lost civics, we've lost the social sciences,
and
we've lost history, we've lost critical thinking. And so that's been lost over the course of the last 30, 40 years in a lot of our public education. So it's not surprising that millions of American citizens could listen to Donald Trump's speech and not recognize his speeches throughout the campaign and not recognize how fundamentally against the very ideals that this nation was founded on they were. It's not to be a shock. It shouldn't be that shocking. I think that there's a racial component to that too. I don't know whether you happen to see the first Saturday Night Live episode after the election. Dave Chappelle was the host.
Yes, I did.
And there was the sketch with him and Chris Rock showed up. There was a sketch of everybody at the election watching party. And,
we've been through this.
And all
between white people.
Exactly. All the white folks were like, "Oh my God, what's happening?" I was like, "Really? Have you not been paying attention to the history of this country?"
Reverend Barber does that too.
Oh yes,
yes. We've been through this.
This is not a
you're
huge
catching
shock
up.
to a lot
You're
of folks.
catching up now.
There's certain folks out here that this is not that huge a shock to. that we're sort of prepared for, in some ways, especially after.
But that's such an important point and link, and it is set out of a sort of love too. There is
world
love,
weariness, but also
weirdness.
love.
Come on, we've been telling you about this. But all right, get on board and all that. So all right, better late than never. I don't know. But there is a radical love transition that we're all trying to make. Well, we messed up. We didn't realize we did this and this. But there's, hate to sound old theological, redemption.
Yeah.
The possibility.
There is the possibility of the American people as a whole to redeem ourselves.
And what this is all about.
Yeah, because
it's the noble experiment of democracy.
Yeah, exactly, of American democracy.
And freedom and liberty.
Absolutely. You know,
and
I mean,
pursuit of happiness,
pursuit
for
of
Pete's sake.
happiness, absolutely.
I mean, why not? I mean, gosh.
We
started doing that in the 60s, but I don't know.
The 60s got
Too
co-opted and corporatized and turned into a brand as opposed to an actual change of overall change of focus. But the other important aspect of it is that we really have to look at fascism. People have to pay attention. People really have to do their research into what fascism is, because something happened also kind of in the 60s and the 70s in the public discourse and the general conversation is that fascist became a catch-all term. And was it, I think, Umberto Eco? There's a wonderful essay by Umberto Eco from 1995 in the New York Review of Books, where he goes through the 14 basic tenets, if you will, of what he called fascism, meaning sort of the overarching general idea of fascism, and in the 60s and 70s, it was the guy that was telling you not to smoke in front of his store was a fascist, or the cop, you know what I mean? It's like it became diluted. The meaning became diluted in a catch-all, and it's and so which then when after groups like after Refuse Fascism sort of did this really detailed analysis and created the group Refuse Fascism specifically using that term, it became very easy for certainly the supporters of Donald Trump, but even people in the middle, even people on the left, to say, "Oh no," just to dismiss that term of fascism because something had been lost in people's understanding of what fascism is and what it was.
It's been corrupted in the public mind.
It's been corrupted, and then of course, the fact that we've lost so much of our critical thinking through our educational system, that we've lost that knowledge of history. When you read about World War II in high school, it's all about Nazi Germany. You don't read anything about the rise of Mussolini, But
I was because I wanted to mention this because I think she was on 2 or 3 weeks ago, an incredible documentary that I saw at the Jewish Community Center called Nana. And it's by her name's Serena Dykman. It's about her grandmother, who was an Auschwitz survivor.
Yes.
And unbelievable story, and finally liberated and married and built a new life. But the important thing, one of the important things in terms of what you're talking about too, is this now is gaining a lot of viewing in schools, and the white kids, the black kids, the kids that really didn't have a clue as to what the Holocaust was about are now seeing, and they're relating, as she pointed out in the show here, at this family level, at the destruction of the people that were the closest to, and they could relate to this. And how dare they do this? How dare they kill every single member of her family and so on? So that's the sort of connection, linkage at this human level, in music and poetry and film and so all the things they don't want to have in school. But and the critical thinking, that's what you're also talking about.
Absolutely.
Awakening that sort of spirit.
Absolutely.
And it's absolutely crucial. We began to start doing that in the 60s as well. And so it's structural, it's philosophical, it's theological, it's all these things. And so this is quite an undertaking. This is,
It's a huge
I mean,
undertaking.
in a way, this is, well, I'm in this too, so this is lifetime. We're signing on for life.
Yeah.
This is a life, and it's a
big
welcome struggle.
It's a welcome, and
it's not going to be a day
needed.
or two.
Exactly.
Here.
It's not a chore. It's really welcome, and people have to really get on board. It's
in their own way, from wherever they're coming
from, wherever
from.
they're doing. Yeah.
And that's so important too. It's not top down, as you say.
No.
This is the doctrine. This is the dogma. This is the plan. This is what is going to be then imposed.
No. It's empowering the people. It's letting people. It's reminding our citizens that they have power. That collectively, we as American citizens have power. It's very, it's very easy for people to say, well, there's nothing I can do about that. There's not, we're just going to have to wait till 2000, or we have to wait till 2018.
Or the next
when 2018
election
comes, or then when 2020, we'll get them out. And that's, that's a sort of way to self-placate, to just sort of say that, okay, well, this solution is in the near distance. It's only a year away till the 2018 election, and then I don't have to deal with it right now, and I can just concentrate on my family and what we need to do to survive on the basic family level or as an individual or what have you, and. You have to look bigger. You have to look broader than just your own circumstance.
Okay, but we do have a political structure. There are organizations. There's money involved, and so on and so on. So, what is the take on the party system, electoral politics? Is that something that? By the way, you have your shirt here, no, right?
Yes, no.
And then on the back you have
refusefascism.org.
Okay. So just in case our audience is wondering what you're saying no to is okay.
Yeah, the no is the I'm sure that anyone who's seen film or video of large protests around the country over the course of the last year has seen many signs held, black signs with the big no on them, and that is refuse fascism.
Exactly. Now, all right, so there is, I know Reverend Barber's practicing more fusion politics and so on. Now, whether it manifests itself in terms of trying to push the Democratic Party to transform itself or a new political party, I mean, have you all thought about that? Or
in some ways, refuse fascism and the goals are in some ways beyond the basic electoral political system or the two-party system or the need for a third party.
You really do? I mean, you don't think that's necessary to be brought in?
No. It's
to have
absolutely
candidates reflecting that, right?
It's absolutely
right.
We're not saying that we're not going to. The political system of the United States is the electoral system of the United States is the electoral system of the United States. That is, there's hardly any way that that's necessarily going to change anytime soon. And that will, in the 2018 elections are underway already. There are people that are declared. They're raising their money. They're putting they're start getting their campaign ads set up. That's good. That's going to happen. That's going to happen regardless.
Right.
And it's absolutely important that the groups like Act Blue or whatever progressive groups that are behind candidates, that are asking the tough questions of candidates, that are really putting the issues toward them, continue doing all of that. That absolutely. But that's not what we're doing. What we are laser focused on getting this regime out of office and not waiting for 2018. What we believe is that we've seen how the electoral process, the way that it's been structured, the way that it's been undermined, really, has failed us. The fact that Donald Trump got 3 million less votes in the basic head-to-head between him and Hillary Clinton.
Right.
The fact that that occurred is and he was still able to get into office. That's a sign of the failure, and that's the second. The two last Republican people in.
But there is a political reality.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Absolutely.
Okay. So what if? All right. You said get rid of the regime, or the two major figures at the head of the regime, replaced by who's third?
Paul Rand is the Speaker of the House.
Paul Rand, Speaker of the House, and then the Secretary of State or something.
Well, here's the thing.
He'd be gone. In your
what we're going to have is we're going to have a constitutional crisis. That's where we are. That's really where we are. I think in a lot of ways
that's what you would like
to
sort of
in some ways I think
create
that we are
further. We already have it.
That's what I'm saying. Is in some ways I think we already at a point of constitutional crisis.
I understand.
Because of the way that this administration came into power, because of the actions that this administration, that this regime are taking, I think that we're already in a constitutional crisis. What Refuse Fascism is looking at is for the people to get together and push that to the fore and further it along. It's essentially, since Donald Trump got into office, people have been talking about how unprecedented all of this is.
Yeah.
Well, an unprecedented situation requires an unprecedented response and an unprecedented
I'm
solution.
with you so far, but
and an unprecedented solution. And so we can't rely on what we've relied on all this time, which is that the checks and balance, the old checks and balances game, they've failed. And so we're going to have to think outside of the box. We're going to have to think outside of the box.
there are some elements, though, within journalism and the courts that are trying their best. But I understand generally what you're saying. But still, the reality is there is an office. There's a president's office. So who is going to take control here, or if you want to use that word? Who's going to
who's going to succeed? Who's going to succeed him? That's the big question. That's the question.
Remains.
It remains to be seen. But if
if you had a candidate, let's say whoever, Bernie or whoever it might be, more or less really agrees with what you're doing, heartfelt and so on, would that then be?
It might be. Here's what
something that you would follow and support him.
In
the electoral
what I would say is that if we get to the point where we can literally remove this administration, it might have to be some sort of conservatorship in place while we have a special election, something that's never happened before. We've never had a special election for the presidency, but that might be what is necessary. Then this is what I mean.
I get your point. We're in
uncharted territory.
I see.
So, and we're not as Refuse Fascism as an organization. We haven't come up with a complete solution to what will have to happen once we get them out. What we have said is that regardless of whatever that solution once we get them out is, we need to get them out. We really have to get them out. That's the most important thing. And and that would in this situation of a constitutional crisis, those out of the box solutions are going to have to be considered very carefully. And a final answer is going to have to be achieved. But right now the most important we have an unbalanced person with the nuclear codes, and
it's an emergency.
That's it.
And Jay, unfortunately, we've got about a minute to go,
yes.
and this has been, the time has really flown here. We are going to have a short clip after we say goodbye here, with Saul Alinsky, appropriately talking about organizing tactics.
Wonderful.
From the bottom up. So that's a good little.
That's a great segue.
Yes, it is. And so in the few seconds we have, tell us again what's happening November 4th, how people can get in touch, how they can become aware of all of this.
Absolutely. November 4th.
Right.
Which is a Saturday, across the country, 20 different cities. There will be people out in the streets from that day forward. November 4th is the beginning of a massive campaign that will continue day in and day out until this regime is out. Go to www.refusefascism.org. You can find Refuse Fascism's page on Facebook, our Twitter feed, our Instagram. We're everywhere in social media. Find us and come out on November 4th.
Come out and join.
Absolutely.
In a true democracy and make this country what it should be.
Take us back to where we're supposed to be.
Jay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jim.
All right, we'll see you soon.
All right.
Thank you all very much for watching us here on The Radical Imagination. It's Jim Vrettos. We'll see you again next week. Take care.
I travel here and then I travel yonder. Well, I travel here and then I travel yonder. Well, I travel here and then I travel yonder. Well, I've been a traveling. I've traveled cold and then I've
If you were described, Saul, as a professional agitator, what would your reaction be to that description?
That's okay with me. That's what you left out one word, Studs. Professional outside agitator. You see, you got to be an outside agitator to begin with, because agitators very rarely come up from the inside. Because if you come up from the inside, one of two things happens to you. Either you get knocked off, or you get co-opted. That's the reason all agitators are outside agitators. And, you see, when you're out to really get change, every community, every place is organized. When sociologists talk about social disorganization or that communities are disorganized, they know what they're talking about. You can go into the cruddiest community. It's got a policy racket going. It's got a syndicate going. It's got a political organization that is crooked as hell. And they're being exploited if it's a company town, but it's organized, you know? It's a contradiction in terms to say that there's such a thing as a disorganized community. So that the job of an agitator is first, if he's going to, it's really not organizing a movement, he's reorganizing it. First he's got to change the whole pattern. He's got to disorganize it. That's why he's an agitator. And after he disorganizes it, then he reorganizes it.
So we're coming to now something. Then this man who enters a community, this man, this outside quote-unquote agitator, has entered a community that is organized to begin with.
That's right.
And organized for what? And why is he there? See, organized for what? The community.
Well, the community is organized on a certain pattern of values. You can call it an exploitation of the many by the few over there. Call it whatever you want to. The organizer brings in another set of values. Now, to say that an organizer comes in who is just in there as sort of a blotter, that he's going in for just participatory democracy. He doesn't have any ideas. He's just going to be a servant to the people, of the masses, so to speak. He will just reflect what they want. It's just a lot of romantic crap. If an organizer doesn't have ideas as to how he wants to change that thing, and more important, if he doesn't have the sophistication and the experience to know how to get it done. See, there's a big difference between the what's that you want to get in life and the how you go about getting it. If you don't know the how about getting it, you're never going to get the what's. I always used to say that if any smart organizer had come up before the Oracle at Delphi, and the Oracle always sounded off with her usual proverbial business of know thyself, you know. A smart organizer would look at her and say, okay, Oracle, now how the hell do I go about doing it? Don't tell me what I have to get. Tell me how to get it, because unless I know the how, the what is just rhetoric, you know. I imagine the Oracle would have had a fit, you know. Would have said one question aloud only to a customer or something, get thee gone.
Yeah.
That organizer's got to have ideas. If he doesn't have ideas, when he comes in there, if he doesn't know how and what to do, the only thing that his presence does is where the population was say 100,000 before he walked in, it now becomes 100,001. That's all. It doesn't make any difference there. He can only come in on the basis really of an invitation from the community. I go to Houston, I do nothing but to lecture at the University of Houston. I get at the airport, the whole clan is out there in full regalia. The mayor is all over the front page of the newspaper. He's going to investigate the university for inviting this radical down to speak to the university. The John Birch Society's got a mass picket line out there. The next morning, there's a big delegation of blacks inviting me to come in because they'd never seen everybody they hated so uptight. But now, if you haven't got that kind of rep, you got to go about working your way in. And one of the basic things here is whether you really, I should stop and say this, Studs, that this is one field on which you cannot pull a con game or snow job. If you don't like people, they goddamn well soon know it. You know, you can pull a fast job if you're selling a vacuum cleaner or something. You're only going to be with the guy for an hour or selling him a house or a car. But when you're selling people and working with them, you're working with them for hours, for days, for weeks, for months. Sooner or later, they sense it, you know. So, as long as you respect the dignity of people, then they'll respond to you. Now, that sounds like an old cliche. But as long as I respect you, for example, I can't come to you and say, now, Studs, This is the way you get this thing done. Because what I'm really saying to you is, look, you dumb son of a bitch, you've been sitting around here for years, and I got to come along and tell you now, this is the way you get it done. So naturally, you're going to resent it. You see, freedom of choice, and freedom is part of dignity, is really the right to make the choice. I go into a neighborhood. I run into you. You're on welfare, you know? You're standing on the corner. So we get into a conversation. So I say, where do you live? Over there. Well, where the f you expect me to live? I'm on relief. What do you want me to live in, a 14-karat gold palace, you know? No, but Jesus, you pay anything to live there? Oh, come on. Trying to be funny? Well, no, I don't want to be funny about it. Jesus, place looks like it's loaded with rats and cockroaches, everything. You damn well know what it is. What would happen if you didn't pay your rent? What would happen? They'd throw me out my kids and everybody else. What do you mean? Yeah. What would happen if nobody paid their rent over there? Why, well, Jesus, they'd have a little trouble throwing us all out, wouldn't they?